Barry Gibb, the legendary Bee Gees member, has always been known for his powerful voice and unmatched music legacy. But at 80, he's facing a deeply personal battle that has left even his most devoted fans heartbroken. For years, this struggle was hidden from the public, but now the truth is out, and it's more shocking than anyone could have imagined. His emotional journey will leave you speechless. You won't believe what Barry's been dealing with behind closed doors. Barry Gibb's life didn't start in the spotlight or with the applause of a crowd. It began in a small, humble house, filled with love, but also marked by hardship. He was just a baby when an event happened that would shape the course of his entire life. Barely 2 years old, Barry reached for a teapot, something many children might do out of curiosity. But in that instant, disaster struck. The teapot tipped, spilling boiling water across his tiny body. The pain must have been unimaginable. The screams echoed through the house as his mother, Barbara, rushed to him, burning her hands as she tried to save him. His father, Hugh, ran frantically through the streets, desperately shouting for help. Doctors told his parents that Barry had mere minutes to live. His skin was burned, his small body wrapped in bandages. Every moment felt like it could be his last. His mother prayed over him, never leaving his side. She whispered words of comfort, even as her own heart broke. His father, a drummer, would tap on the side of Barry's bed, a rhythmic gesture meant to soothe him to sleep. It was an instinct, a small but meaningful act that would echo throughout Barry's life. Somehow, against all odds, Barry survived. The miracle of his survival was clear to everyone who knew him, but the scars were a constant reminder of the near tragedy that shaped his childhood. For months, Barry's body was covered in bandages, and when he finally came home, those scars were more than just physical. They were a symbol of his resilience, of the fight for life that had begun before he even understood what survival meant. As a child, Barry wasn't just marked by those burns. He was marked by something deeper, a quiet strength, a quiet understanding of how fragile life could be. He wasn't just a little boy who had survived. He was a boy who had already faced death and walked away from it. That fight for life, that instinct to survive, would stay with him forever. Life wasn't easy after the accident. The Gibb family was poor, and Barry's father, Hugh, worked as a drummer in small clubs, often bringing home just enough to get by. Barbara did everything she could to hold the family together, but they moved often, always chasing cheaper rent and better luck. But through all the struggle, there was one constant: music. Barry's father filled their small home with rhythm, and soon Barry began to hum along. Even as a boy, he could feel the power of music. It became his escape from the difficulties of life. When things felt uncertain, when hunger and fear crept in, Barry sang. It was the one thing that didn't hurt. And even at that young age, Barry was already turning his pain into something beautiful. Music for him wasn't just an outlet, it was a way to survive. It became his lifeline. This early pain, this unimaginable battle for his life, was the foundation upon which Barry would build his future. The scars, both visible and invisible, didn't break him. They made him stronger. They gave him a depth of emotion and resilience that would shape the music he would create for the world. His voice, his songwriting, his ability to express deep emotions through his music all came from that first, painful fire. Barry Gibb and his brothers, Robin and Maurice, grew up in a world where survival wasn't a given. They were born into poverty, with a father who played drums in small clubs, scraping together just enough to feed the family, and a mother who did everything she could to hold things together. Their early years were a mix of love, hardship, and the constant struggle to make ends meet. They moved frequently, chasing affordable housing and better luck, but it always felt like they were a step behind. Despite the challenges, the Gibb family was filled with warmth and a deep bond, and music was the thread that held everything together. From a young age, Barry and his brothers were exposed to music through their father, Hugh, who would fill their tiny house with rhythm. Hugh wasn't just a father, he was their first teacher, their first source of inspiration. He didn't have the luxury of fancy instruments or a big band behind him. It was just him and his drumsticks, creating rhythms that somehow filled the gaps in their lives. For Barry, the sound of the drums was a signal, a comfort, a sense of order in a world that often felt chaotic. The rhythm became a foundation, a steady beat in a home that was otherwise marked by struggle. Barry's voice, soft and full of curiosity, began to hum along with the beats. It wasn't something planned. It wasn't a grand ambition. It was just a natural response to the music that surrounded him. The house would fill with sound, and Barry, still just a boy, found himself singing along. As much as music was their father's world, it quickly became Barry's as well. When times got tough, when they didn't know where the next meal would come from, it was the music that offered comfort, the music that made everything feel bearable. As the Gibb brothers grew, they became more and more involved in music. Barry wasn't alone in his passion. Robin and Maurice, the twins, followed him everywhere. They were like shadows, always singing, always playing. They too found solace in the music, and the three of them started forming their first band, the Rattlesnakes. It was nothing fancy. They didn't have expensive instruments or a professional setup. All they had was a cheap guitar, their voices, and a dream. They played wherever they could, small venues, sometimes for nothing but a bit of bread or the chance to hear applause. Their songs were often covers, like those of the Everly Brothers, but it didn't matter. What mattered was the magic they were creating together. There were times when it seemed like everything was stacked against them. One day, the guitar they had was damaged beyond repair, and for a moment, it felt like their dreams might die with it. They couldn't afford a new one. Music, for a brief time, seemed impossible, but giving up wasn't in their blood. Barry didn't see the guitar as the end. Instead, he rebuilt, he reimagined, and he pushed forward. He wasn't going to let the challenges break him or his brothers. They were more than just a band. They were a family, and together, they would find a way. As the Gibb family moved to Australia in search of better opportunities, things didn't get any easier. The family was still struggling, but the dream of making music, of turning their pain into something powerful, kept them going. In Australia, the brothers didn't suddenly find fame or fortune. Instead, they sang in open fields, in between car races at speedways, with dust in their eyes and the smell of gasoline in the air. It wasn't glamorous, it was gritty, it was hard, but it was real. They sang like their lives depended on it, because they did. Music was their escape, their chance at something more, something better. And even though they were far from home, far from everything they knew, they carried the spark of that dream with them. That's when the world first began to listen. It wasn't instant, it wasn't overnight success, but something in Barry's songwriting stood out. Even as a teenager, his lyrics were full of depth, born from the pain of their early struggles. His music wasn't just about catchy tunes, it was about the raw, real experiences of growing up poor, of living with the scars of a past that never quite went away. His words had weight, and that weight was what made them so powerful. By the time he was 15, Barry was already filling notebooks with songs, pouring his heart into each one. He didn't just write to pass the time, he wrote because it was the only way to survive. His music was his therapy, his way of coping with the world that often felt like it was against him. At the same time, his brothers were right there with him. Music wasn't just Barry's dream, it was their collective dream. Robin and Maurice didn't just follow Barry, they were with him step by step, building the foundation of something much bigger than they could have imagined. Their voices blended together, creating something that felt like magic. The harmony between them was undeniable, and together they became more than just three brothers. They became a force in the music world. They called themselves the Bee Gees, a name that would come to symbolize something bigger than just the Gibb brothers. It would represent a revolution in music, a harmony born out of pain, struggle, and dreams too big for their small town. By the mid-1960s, the Bee Gees had signed with a record label in Sydney, but their success didn't come easily. No one took them seriously at first. They were just three skinny kids with strange accents, trying to make it in a world that didn't know their sound. But Barry's voice, his falsetto, was something special. And, slowly, the world began to take notice. Their songs found their way onto the radio. Their harmonies resonated with listeners, and the Bee Gees began to make their mark. They weren't just another band, they were changing the way people thought about music. They were blending pop with soul, creating melodies that could make anyone feel something deep inside. Their first big hit, New York mining disaster 1941 had people convinced they were the Beatles. But this wasn't just about imitation. The Bee Gees had something unique, something real. They had the voice, the sound, and the songwriting that could turn heads. They weren't just singing for applause anymore. They were singing to be heard, to be understood. As their songs climbed the charts, the world began to see them for who they truly were. Three brothers who had turned their dreams into something bigger than they could have ever imagined. But the road wasn't always easy. The pressures of fame began to take a toll. By the time they were in their 20s, the brothers were expected to deliver hit after hit, and the stress of constant touring, recording, and performing began to wear on them. The harmony that had once come so naturally began to crack. Robin, who had always been the sensitive one, began to feel overshadowed by Barry, and that tension would eventually lead to Robin leaving the group in 1969. It was a devastating blow for Barry. The Bee Gees were more than just his career. They were his family, his identity. Losing Robin felt like losing part of himself. For a while, Barry tried to go solo. He released a project called The Kid's No Good, but it didn't take off. The world didn't want to hear him alone. They wanted to hear the Bee Gees, the brothers who had turned pain into harmony. But despite the setback, Barry didn't give up. By 1970, the brothers found their way back to each other, and their reunion brought about one of the most beautiful songs they would ever create. How Can You Mend a Broken Heart? It wasn't just a hit, it was a reflection of their journey, their struggles, and their love for one another. It became an anthem of healing, not just for the brothers, but for everyone who had ever experienced heartbreak. Through it all, through poverty, fame, heartbreak, and loss, the Bee Gees, led by Barry, kept going. They had turned their pain into music, and that music carried them to heights they had once only dreamed of. They had created something magical, and together they would continue to build on it, sharing their voices and their stories with the world. The road to stardom for Barry Gibb and his brothers, Robin and Maurice, wasn't a straight path. It was filled with triumphs, struggles, and an unseen battle that for many years stayed hidden beneath the surface. From the moment they first picked up their instruments and began singing, they knew they had something special, but nothing could prepare them for the roller coaster ride that was about to begin. The Bee Gees had always been a group of three brothers who shared a bond that went beyond music. They were a family, and their music was the glue that held them together. But as they made their way to stardom, they found that fame wasn't as simple as writing songs and playing shows. Behind the scenes, there was an overwhelming pressure to succeed, and it weighed heavily on all of them, especially Barry. In the early days, it wasn't easy. When the Bee Gees first moved to Australia, they played in small venues, often for little more than a bit of bread or a few moments of applause. They weren't the famous Bee Gees we know now. They were just three brothers, struggling to make it. They didn't have fancy equipment or big studio backing. What they had was determination, talent, and the support of each other. They played wherever they could, speedways, fields, small clubs, singing because they had no other choice. Music was their escape from the harsh reality of their lives, and it became their only hope for a better future. But things started to change when they signed with a record label in Sydney. They were still young, but they had the voice and the harmonies that made them stand out. Barry's falsetto in particular was unique, and it didn't take long for people to take notice. Their first major break came with New York mining disaster 1941, a song that had listeners convinced they were hearing the Beatles. The Bee Gees had arrived, and the world started to listen. But with that success came new challenges. In the mid-1960s, they made the decision to leave Australia and head to London to pursue bigger dreams. The music scene there was full of possibilities, but it wasn't going to be easy. They arrived with hope, but also with little more than their talent and determination. They met Robert Stigwood, a man who would later play a pivotal role in their success. He saw something special in the Bee Gees, something more than just their voices. He saw potential in their songwriting, especially in Barry. It was Barry's ability to write songs that went straight to the heart that would be their ticket to stardom. Their first major hit in England was To Love Somebody, and from that moment on, they were on the map. Songs like Massachusetts and Words followed, and suddenly the Bee Gees were everywhere. They weren't just another pop group, They were shaping the sound of a generation. The fame came fast, and with it, the pressure to deliver. They were young, barely out of their teens, but the expectations on them were massive. The endless interviews, the recording sessions, the tours. It was exhausting. And it wasn't just the physical toll, it was the emotional weight of being in the public eye, constantly scrutinized, constantly compared to others. The success came at a cost. While the brothers were still living their dream, cracks started to show beneath the surface. The bond that had always held them together began to feel strained. Barry, as the lead vocalist and the main songwriter, began to feel the weight of it all. He was often seen as the driving force behind the Bee Gees' success, and with that came tension, especially with Robin. Robin, always the sensitive one, began to feel overshadowed by Barry. It wasn't Barry's fault. He was doing what he had always done, but the pressure of constantly being in the spotlight created friction between them. The tension reached its peak in 1969 when the band made the decision to release Barry's song, 1st of May, over Robin's Lamplight as their next single. Robin felt overlooked and betrayed. To him, it was more than just a song. It was a symbol of how his contributions were being dismissed. He left the group, and just like that, the Bee Gees were no more. Barry was devastated. The Bee Gees were more than just a band to him. They were his family, and now, part of that family was gone. For a brief moment, it felt like the music was over, that everything they had worked for had fallen apart. Barry tried to go solo, but the world wasn't ready to hear him without his brothers. His solo project, The Kid's No Good, was a failure. The world didn't want just Barry Gibb. They wanted the Bee Gees, the trio of brothers who had built something special together. For Barry, the failure of his solo career was a harsh reminder of just how important his brothers were to him, not just musically, but emotionally. He wasn't just trying to create music. He was trying to hold on to the bond that had carried them through everything. But when his brothers eventually returned, it was clear that the Bee Gees had something no one else could replicate. Their reunion wasn't just about making music, it was about healing, about finding their way back to each other. And from that reunion came one of their most iconic songs, How Can You Mend a Broken Heart? Their music, which had once been born from struggle and hardship, now had a new depth. The song became a symbol of their journey, of the pain they had endured together and apart. And as the Bee Gees grew stronger, so did their sound. Their rise to stardom wasn't just about writing catchy songs. It was about turning their own personal struggles into music that connected with people on a deeper level. Barry had learned that fame didn't heal old wounds. It only made them more apparent. And while their success was hard-earned, it didn't fix the internal struggles they were facing. But despite everything, the Bee Gees kept going. They had each other, and they had their music. As the Bee Gees' fame continued to rise, so did the pressures. The 1970s brought new challenges, especially with the rise of disco. They became symbols of the disco era, and while they were embraced by fans, they also became targets of criticism. The Disco Sucks movement began to gain momentum, and suddenly, the Bee Gees found themselves at the center of a backlash. What had once been their greatest triumph, their falsetto and their infectious rhythms, was now being mocked. The same fans who had once adored them were now turning against them. It was a devastating blow, watching something they had worked so hard for be torn apart by a movement they couldn't control. But even then, Barry didn't stop. He kept writing, kept creating, and kept pushing forward. In the years that followed, the Bee Gees remained relevant, but the joy of the early years was gone. Barry continued to work with other artists, writing hits for Dolly Parton, Barbra Streisand, and Diana Ross. But each success felt a little more hollow. The pressure, the scrutiny, and the constant demands of fame had worn him down. He wasn't just a star. He was a man carrying the weight of his family's legacy, their struggles, and their pain. His music had always been a way to cope with the world around him, but as he grew older, it became harder to find the joy in it. Despite the hardships, the Bee Gees' story was far from over. The years of struggle, both personal and professional, had made them stronger, and through all the ups and downs, they had one thing that no one could take away: their bond as brothers, as family. Their music was a reflection of that bond, a bond that had endured everything life threw at them. It wasn't just about fame or success. It was about survival, about turning pain into something beautiful. It was about the music, yes, but more importantly, it was about the love that kept them together, even through the hardest times.